Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCG live codes, make sure you check out the Poketown store. You can get a 5% discount on your orders using that code OmniPoke. For today's video, we have 3 regionals to look at over last weekend. This was kind of the knee-jerk reaction to the EUIC, and surprisingly, we're actually kind of at that midpoint already in the Battle Styles to Scarlet and Violet format, where we don't really have that many tournaments of this format, but it's really looking out to be a really interesting one, I think. Very well-balanced format, where we're going to see peaks and troughs of different decks, based on their popularity going into the tournament, and also just sort of knee-jerking to the previous week's results. So I think it's going to be a quite interesting one, and each regional weekend is going to feel quite different, I think, where I'm actually going to Malmo in a few days' time next week, preparing for that regional myself, and there's also, I believe it's Hartford that weekend as well. So we'll start off with the largest regional, which was Portland, over 1,000 players, and we have the top 8 breakdown here. Landon was able to win with Giratina, with Arceus and Bibarel. This was something that didn't do all that well at the EUIC, but was definitely a deck kind of on the radar, just because it keeps decks honest. Judge and Path is a hell of a combination in the format right now. Seems to be very frustrating for Gardevoir players, Mew players, Lugia players, and even Lost Box with that heavy Judge count. You're basically just trying to create some pretty annoying chunky 2 prizes and throw the opponent off course with this combination is pretty much the main idea here. Has a very simple item shell, which I think is kind of the best way you can go with this. Has the nice 1 belt, 1 cleansing glove combo. Cleansing gloves allows Giratina to reach on Gardevoir EX as well as Mew VMAX. So having the cleansers and the choice belt means you don't necessarily need to play Drapion, which I think is good when you're playing no counter stadium yourself. You're just trying to play the paths, so the Drapion is far less effective. So it definitely makes sense there. Again, quite streamlined on the support count as well. Sometimes you'd see Serena in this slot, or some of the boss's order slots. Sometimes you see Sharon's Care. But outside of that, very, very straightforward, just do the thing kind of deck. And Landon had some amazing on-stream moments with the Squovert, so it's definitely won me over. I was a little sus of Squovert at first, just thinking that there's a ton of matchups where you can't put this Pokemon into play because it gives certain players easier prize maps. Definitely Lost Zone box players, giving them Squovert Barrel as easier prizes can sometimes be very detrimental to you, but it essentially just makes Incisors just absolutely busted. You declog so easily with the Nest into Incisors combo, you just get to see more things throughout the game, which means you're not whiffing on bosses, you're not whiffing on judges, no matter what your hand ends up being. So that's always a nice combination. And I think this is a really good shell going forward, to be honest. There's not too much you need to change, really. It covers a lot of bases and will continue to be powerful, I would expect. We then have Reagan in second with Lugia. Is incorporating the Single Strike Urshifu. This is kind of the evolution from what we saw at the EUIC, where Duraludon came out the gates. Urshifu now is an answer to Duraludon that can 1-hit KO it with Gmax 1 blow, which is exceptional, but also acts as a means of getting through the likes of Goodra, which was also kind of one of the roles that Duraludon had in the first place. So it's answering the answer that was sort of constructed at the EUIC. And it also is kind of cleaner, I think, because you don't need to rely on so many impact energies. This one is just playing triple earn and just the single strike energies. I still do kind of like 1 impact because it just makes Yveltal that much more easy to use, but you just gain more space than you would with the Duraludon because the Dura also forces you to play like 2 to 3 impacts to actually make that package work. So it allows Reagan to just have more consistency spaces. And outside of this, it just seems to be a very cookie cutter list. Interestingly, it's choosing to play Penny rather than Thornton, which we had seen again in a few lists. And we actually saw on the stream how Penny was quite effective for Reagan, allowing some of your V Pokemon just to tank hits and then pick them back up, of course, is the main idea here, and remove threats from play. Alongside the Collapse Stadium, you can get rid of your fish quite effectively, which is also pretty nice. So yeah, Lugia continuing to be a big threat in the game, and again, I think this is going to continue to be the case going forward. We have a number of Lost Boxes doing quite well. Grant Manley was playing a sort of turbo approach with that Kyogre finishing combo. We know their team has played this a number of tournaments in the previous format, and now they're bringing it once again, and this looks again to be just a very well-refined shell here, pretty consistent going on. I think you get away with 1 cram when you are playing the turbo approach, because oftentimes you're trying to skip immediately to 7 if you can. and it has the heavy recycler, of course, trying to lean into the Kyogre, and also just letting you use Greninja as often as possible is something going on. Interesting to see no Pal Pad in here. When you do play the Pokestop, there's always those risks that can be a little bit troubling at times, but I suppose you don't have to lean into it. This is actually like, because you are incorporating the Kyogre, it's not fully leaning into the turbo package, right? Because it just plays the 1 vacuum. So oftentimes you'd probably have to forest full vacuum to actually get to that 7. I think if you really want a hybrid, you need to play the second copy of Vacuum, but I think that's something you sort of give up on just because Kyogre is just such a powerful late game card. We still don't see it happen all that often on stream, but the card is still gonna put its weight in some tankier matchups for sure, and gives you a decent way into beating Mew without having to play Drapion, which is also quite good. We have Andrew also playing a sort of turbo-y approach. So this is much more on the turbo side of things, right? Because instead of playing Kyogre, you are playing the Drapion and you're playing Snorlax. And as you can see, those spaces are dedicated to just more vacuums, less energy, and less recyclers, essentially is the key difference between those two. This one's also incorporating a Roxanne, which is also pretty interesting, and that Luminion, so a few different things that we're seeing in this deck list. Slightly light on the switch cards, I suppose, but is, again, just another great way to play a turbo approach overall. I'm a big fan of the Lax right now. I definitely think it makes sense in the list, and this is playing, you know, the big payoff V cards, which we have seen a few times over. Looking pretty solid there. We also have Alex Szymanski, once again making top 8 straight after the EUIC placement, and is now playing the Moltres Kyogre combo, so 2 Kyogres in top 8. Quite different builds though, so Grant with kind of the more proactive, let's get to 7 as quickly as possible approach with some V attackers, and this is much more, I'm just trying to cycle through cards in my deck. I have Moltres for type coverage into Mew and into Guardy. What I always think is a little bit strange is that Moltres is covering some of the main matchups that Kyogre also tries to cover. So I always think this is a bit strange and unintuitive to play the 2 cards together. I still really like just a pure Moltres build, which still has 1 Snorlax, and I also like the Kyogre build that Grant played a little bit more. I will never get to grips with playing no VIP pass. It just feels so strange to me because it's such a high value card, allowing you to get multiple Confays developed. Confay Greninja is a great combo to find in the opening stages. Confay Cram, all of these things really are important. And even in Mirror, just finding Manaphy, you know, committing a ball search to Manaphy is so impactful. So the spaces that you're gaining just to play 1 level 2 Fog and like a Pokestop don't outweigh the strength of VIP. I think VIP is just like so quintessential in every Lost Box that you've seen up until now. It's like, it just feels like an edgy thing to do to not be playing it. I know it's had a great result and had a great result at EUIC, so I think there's something to it, but you just have to lean into the Power Spike. Lost Box is one of the best decks to play VIP Pass of all decks in the game because they play Colress and they play Confay, so the diminishing returns you get aren't as bad because you have easy fodder for these cards with your choices midway through the game. So this is actually one of the best users of using VIP Pass, and you have extra reach in the opening turns with your Confays, provided you hit more switch cards and whatnot, to actually see those VIP pass. So you actually have increased odds of hitting them compared to other decks. So VIP just makes so much sense in this archetype. It's like not a cut ever. I think it's like strictly so wrong, to be honest with you. I'm not against adding in level balls and Fog Crystal, but it has to be in addition to rather than instead of VIP pass. It's just so crazy. The last list we were waiting for was actually Austin's Mew list, which has finally been added on here. And it's looking to be a DT Judge Path based build of Mew. This one's playing Penny as well, so this is a bit of a tech card to help out against Lost Zone Box. Obviously, it doesn't help out too much against Kyogre, but against more sort of tempo-y Lost Boxes, you can pick up some damaged like Genesect and whatnot, which I think is pretty cool for you. Is still sticking with that Fan of Waves, even though Pablo said it was one of their weaker cards in the deck. Instead of sacrificing a Belt for Gloves, it's playing 2 and 1, so very tool heavy. But pretty straightforward outside of that. We have a Miraidon Flaffy here, which is a bit of a surprise, really. It's still surprising to see Miraidon go so deep in tournaments, but it is starting to find different ways of doing well, which is always a good indication of the power level of a card, if it can do well in different iterations. We've seen it in the Champions League, we've seen it in the EUIC, and now we're seeing it at 1,000-player regionals, so we have to stop discrediting this archetype, and this is one that's also been doing quite well locally around the UK, I know that much, where the Flaffy gives you those guarantees of energy attachments. You can work towards higher damage output with Dynamic Spark from Raichu V. You, of course, have Tempo from Raikou and Rhydon setting things up. And to try and stabilize your Lost Zone matchup, which, you know, when you are playing Flappies, they're kind of liabilities against Lost Zone, it plays that 2-1 Magnezone line where you can use Magnetic Tension to bring up Manaphy's and knock them out. And then you can go into your V-Star Power Electro Star. So it's kind of a win-win situation in a few ways, right? Because if a Guardy or a Lost Box doesn't put down... Like, as soon as they put down Magnezone, the opponent has to put down a Manaphy because they expect the V-Star, right? So then you can actually always get off your attack with your V. That's kind of the mentality going on. And if for some reason they just don't respect the Magnezone or whatever, don't put down Manaphy, you do get your 2-prize turn, which is, of course, exceptional. So it seems like a pretty good combo. We haven't seen too much of this, but that 2-1 line was the exact same thing that we saw at the Champions League. So it's no surprise that it's continuing to be a factor. This one's playing a really interesting supporter lineup with the very heavy Serena and Boss, so trying to really sit on that, let me take 2 prizes straight away, even 2 rope as well, so even Arven becomes a way of getting something pushed into the active in the opening stages. So that really leans into the tempo of this deck, right? If you get a generator off, you get your turn attachment, you can just be blasting through V Pokemon very aggressively, and I think that's really an indication with the supporter line that that's what this deck wants to do. It wants to capitalize on slower starts as quickly as possible and just win the game off of that tempo immediately and have follow-up plays from your Flaffy, like pretty much guaranteed, rather than having to hit generators again in future. And the Arven, definitely a big part of the deck as well, guaranteeing these generators. In the past, we've seen it alongside the Crams to try and help you have extra access to the generator, but in this case, you get to play multiple stones and an EXP, as well as your generators, which can be found with Arven, which is definitely pretty viable. Still having those Judge in here for hand disruption, which is pretty good. A little bit lighter on the switch outs than we saw from Rob's build, but I suppose that's because you're playing Magnezone as a kind of different answer to deal with Lost Zone players, where you have a chunkier 2-prize Pokemon at your disposal that obviously can't use a switch card as well. So really interesting list, one I need to play around with this week, actually, because it's quite different from the Miraidons that I've played in the past, and obviously a big result here from Anthony. Then we have another Arc deck doing quite well. This is Arc Dura, but is sacrificing the Vulpix, which I think a lot of people were expecting going into the next set of tournaments, and at least had a few more answers for, and has subbed in the Umbreon. The Umbreon, of course, having that gusting ability when you evolve into it, and it's a dark type that can knock out Mew. Obviously, there's a lot of Mew VMAX players that have cut Oricorio, which makes the 160 a much better damage output for you when you double it up to that 320. You can knock out those Mews. It is playing Belts and Alakazam as well if it really needs to get over the line against players playing Oricorio, so I suppose that's a bit of a factor. And of course, this can bring up Gardevoir EX and knock it out as an attacker itself, or just bring up things like Curlias in the opening stages so you can Trinity Nova them quite quickly. And because you have Gusting from this VMAX, it allows you to play quite a different supporter lineup with 3 Adventurous Discovery here, allowing you to get 3 Vs directly to hand. Obviously, Adventurers can get you into your Starbirth, which then allows you to cherry pick 2 other cards immediately from your deck, but now it can also tutor Gust, and it can tutor Duraludon, which sometimes just making Duraludon, or making your second one against Lugia players, is enough to win the game immediately. So it's not really surprising to see this supporter do so well in this list because of how it's crafted. I think if there wasn't Umbreon in here, it wouldn't be a good enough card, but because you can now tutor Gust, I think it's just good enough to be worth playing in the deck, rather than just hard draw from high accounts of Chorus and Research and whatnot. The deck's still playing a couple Judge for hand disruption, a couple Boss, even though you are playing Umbreon. It's playing Karen's Conviction. Obviously, Umbreon and Dura are single strike Pokemon, so you can buff their damage output. Dura with Belts and with Alakazam and with Hawlucha, there's a few ways that you can actually make your Pulverization reach into 280 hit point Pokemon, which I think is pretty viable and gets you towards dealing with Goodra as well. So that's pretty strong. The Volo is obviously a very good card against Lost Zone box players, where you can just discard a heavily damaged Pokemon, similar to seeing Collapse Stadium, but this can play a much narrower bench at times. So it's just another iteration of the Arc Dura core, this time adding in Umbreon for decent type coverage and Gusting, and lets you play a different engine once again. So another one that I need to explore, really, because we are going to continue to see Arc piles of these sorts of iterations do well over and over again. because I think we've started to see from this format that the matchups are close enough that just playing a deck that gets into the game is just good enough if you are playing like these sort of checks to other main decks in the format. So I think Arc in general is just going to continue to survive in all sorts of different ways throughout this format. It just seems to be doing enough right now in the game with the power level slightly dipped from rotation. It looks like Arceus can get in there and just be very effective, as we've seen from this top 8. We also have a number of the decks from Sao Paulo here. This was a 765 player tournament, and this one was won by a Lossome box. This is, again, the turbo build, but it's also playing the Skyseal Stone, so that gauntlet approach where you're playing multiple options, again, has that heavy V structure, has a couple vacuum and the heavy gate going on here. So again, it seems like turbo is just winning out, essentially. It doesn't surprise me too much. It gives you the highest tempo plays. You know, Dragonite can be similar to what I was saying with Miraidon, just that punisher of weaker starts by just getting in there and knocking out an evolving 2-prizer from Arc or from Mew, which I think could be really huge. And from Lugia, of course. So just trying to get in there when you naturally play a high count of ropes, and of course you have Forest Sealstone to try and make this happen. The tempo of Dragonite can, again, just really punish slower starts, which I think is massive. Greninja as well, similarly, getting to 7 just really puts the pressure on Mirror and puts the pressure on Guardy to find those Manaphy's, and if not, you're going to instantly punish them, which I think is great. And then having the Sky fall back just gives you a much more secure Mew matchup when you don't necessarily need to lean into the Forest so much. You just need to secure 2 knockouts, essentially, if you can get the Forest to work alongside Raihan. And I think Raihan's definitely a big card in this deck. So, yeah, another great way to play Turbo Lost Box, which, again, I don't think I've profiled on the channel just yet. So, need to do that for this format. In second place, we have the Mew. Again, the DTE-based build. This one is playing the Pidgeot Dreepy Infestation package. I don't know how effective this actually is because we still see enough Penny and Thornton in the Lugias and the Gardevoirs now that pretty much everyone's prepared for this, but I suppose it might be one of those situations where it's hidden game 1 and then they don't really realize that they're out of resources until it's too late and you can just sort of catch them. I suppose that's a thing. I don't necessarily think this is that high value because everyone's on red alerts for a while, but it's definitely going to be that situational card that can come up here and there. It's not the worst thing in the world, but outside of that, it's the classic DTE Mew Shell. It is playing a few different stadiums in here. Just the 2-path, quite low on that front, but does have Silene to sort of add to your counts for whatever matchup you happen to come up against, so that's pretty cool. We actually do have a few more Sao Paulo lists. This is on PokerStats, by the way, so we can also look at a few others here. I am going to be delving into Twitter, so wish me luck. We have Williams' top 4 list. This is Gardevoir. Looks to be a pretty simplistic item lineup, but it's playing double Collapsed and a Forest Sealstone rather than a Sky Sealstone. So Forest is just one of these cards that can help you get into that game a little bit more. 3, 6, 9, 10, 11 energy, I think, as well. So without Sky Sealstone, I think you're slightly weaker into Mew, of course, because you are put more on a clock to use Zacian 2 times over. What is this card here? Is this a Mew? Yeah, this is Mew and this is Manaphy, right? Yeah, okay. So it's the standard basic lineup of Pokemon. It's playing double Arcana, though. And outside of that, it's the 3 Research, 1 Serena. It's playing the Worker. That's an Arven, I believe. Arven for Forest Sealstone is a mini combo that you have going on in this list that wasn't in the previous build, so that's something. But yeah, pretty solid 60 there from Will. We also have Yurko's Lugia list as I continue to traverse Twitter. Wish me luck. Hopefully you guys can all see that. It's cutting off a little bit on the left-hand side, but it is the double fish, double or 1 Titar, 1 Yveltal, 1 Stonjourner, Pumpkin, Serena. It is also playing the Urshifu, so that seems to be definitely the jumping off point, right? It's the same thing where we see triple Urn and 4 single strike energies. It's just less invasive than the Duraludon overall, and it answers Dura in Mirror quite well. This is only playing 2 stadiums, which is pretty wonky. Just Collapse, no No Mezagoza whatsoever, so not wanting to flip those coins. Only plays 3 Lugia, doesn't even play things like Great Ball to offset it, so potentially a little bit greedy on that front. To just play the minimal outs, I suppose you could say, and less coin flips to actually get your Lugia into the game. But Yurko's a pretty accomplished player, so not too much to say on that one. We have another Arctina doing quite well. This one is playing the Drapion. It's a 2-2 Bibarel line. Sorry, it's cutting off. It's a 2-2 Tina and a 4-3 Arc. But again, very similar to the list that we've seen actually win the tournament. This one continues to play the Squover. This one is playing Sharon's Care. But yeah, this seemed to be a really good tournament to play the Arctina. I think there was just a lot of expectation that Lost Box was going to be around. And just playing Quad Path, Quad Judge is really annoying for Guardi as well. So that's definitely helpful. Also in top 8, we get to see Victor's Charizard Lost Box. This one is playing a couple interesting cards. It's playing the Defiant Band, which we haven't seen much of at all. Typically, we just see Choice Belt. It's playing Triple Clara as well, so really leaning heavily into that. It's still playing the More Pidgeot package, which I think most people have moved away from recently, but Pidgeot Forest is still a decent consistency combo that you can have access to. And it is also playing the Roxanne as well. Just the one Vacuum. Typically you see a couple more of these. You typically see at least an extra Stadium or an extra Vacuum, so again, quite light on path bounces. But hey-ho, some nice lists there from, again, just some pretty solid top-tier stuff. There was another Lost Zone box, another Mew. And what was it? Yeah, just more Lost Zone in the top 8. And then finally we have the Singapore Regionals. This was 189 players. We only have a handful of lists, but Cash was able to win with Arctina as well. So again, over the same weekend, Arctina winning 2 tournaments, showing the power of this archetype and the engine in general. But it seems like Bibarel Squover has just been accepted here. The deck list looks very similar. Cash is playing the Sharon's Care and the Palpad in the 60. And is just playing an extra shoe and a second copy of Rope. Isn't playing the Cleansing Gloves, which I'm kind of interested in personally, but that's just me. But has the same core concept going on here, where it's tanky 2 prizes with a draw engine that hand disrupts. It's a pretty good combo. We have Guardi in second with Jitmin. We then have a Lugia Archeops in top 4. Again, playing the Urshifu, so everyone's basically jumped ship. Interestingly enough, this one is playing the Double Impact. Is it playing Double Earn? Oh, it's playing Triple Earn, so really heavy on that front. I think 1 Impact Triple Earn is the way I want to go about things, but this one is playing those Mezagozas. It's playing just 1 A-Spec Nest Ball. It's playing the Regenerative, which is a bit of a high roll, but there you go. It's got the Thornton, still got the Burnett. Horrible way to lay out the list, but there you go. And we also have the deck list of Hugo's Guardi list. The rest of the top 8 was Gudra in top 4, Mew, Miraidon Flaffy, once again making it into top 8. So 2 Miraidon Flaffies as well, and an Arc Dura Vulpix. So actually the Shemansky special did make another top 8 here. And we have, well, from PTCG Live, look at this. We have a top 8 deck list of Guardi. And this looks to be pretty straightforward. It's playing Clara and Miriam, which you don't see too often. It's playing just one boss. Oh, it's playing 1 boss, 1 Serena. It's playing 1 copy of Jelly and the double Arcana. So a few people are trying to make that space for the extra Arcana by the looks of things from Tord 60. Not really sure it's been cut too much. I'm also really interested to see Nestball. Oh, okay, so it's VIP that got cut. Why is everyone cutting VIP Pass? It's such an insanely important card. Again, this is like Lost Box in that you have refinement, so just get rid of them when they're bad, and they're busted when they're good. This is also playing no Mew either, and Mew is such a big card for the deck. Man, you don't know how many times I've been bailed out by Mew when I played Guardi. Actually insane. Oh well, I just wanted to end on the day one. I probably should have started with this, to be honest. But the Portland day one metagame is also just something I wanted to look at and discuss as we go into the next set of tournaments. So to my surprise, Guardy was the most popular deck. Now I thought it was going to gain some popularity, but I didn't think it would be anything like this because I thought very logically and very easily that Lost Box would come to counteract the Guardy, and Lost Box was the most popular deck in EUIC, and now they have a reason to see play because they have a good matchup in Guardy. So, as someone who was standing Lost Box the whole time pre-EYC, I thought it was just an obviously easy play this weekend. So, I'm amazed that people were brave enough to bring Guardy, what I think it's unfavored into Lost Box in general. So, I would expect Guardy to drop in popularity, to be honest with you. I'd be surprised if it gets over 15% again in regionals, because it had a really poor conversion from day one to day two. It can still do well at tournaments, like we saw. Some did still make it into top 8, so it's certainly still a strong archetype. But it doesn't particularly enjoy a lot of Arctina coming around, especially if they are playing cleansers. I think it gets quite difficult for you. It doesn't enjoy just the amount of Lost Box around. And I think Lost Box is probably going to remain the most popular deck in the format. And I think around this 20% mark is where we're going to continue to see it, to be honest with you. Lugia and Mew. I think Mew will probably stay where it is, but I think Lugia could probably gain some of Guardy's meta share. I would expect them both to be around 15% going into the next few tournaments. Miraidon, interestingly, is holding pretty strong. It's got more percentage than I thought it would have in Portland, and it's had a couple top 8 placements now with Flaffy, so back to the drawing board, more testing to be done there, because the Flaffy approach could still be quite powerful. Mew basically is going to stay around that sort of 9 to 12%, I think, the whole time. And Gudra didn't do too well over the weekend. It doesn't appreciate the amount of Guardy that turned up, to be honest with you. So probably will stabilize still around that sort of 6th most popular deck, 5th, 6th most popular deck, because there probably will be more Lost Boxes to sort of farm, although you do still have a really rough time into Lugia, and I don't know if we found any solution for that just yet, outside of like Copium, Articuno plays, or other disruption plays you can try and make to put them off the scent, like Sinnoh, Roxanne, those sorts of things, to gain a turn against them. So Gudra's back to dodge and weaving Lugia, essentially, and a little bit awkward into Guardia as well, but I think should still be relevant, being okay into Lost Zone Box and being one of the better punishers of that. But I do think possibly sort of elbowing their way into the sort of top 6 in popularity will be Arc decks. I think they're going to be pretty good still. I think it comes down to how you try and tech your Arceus. I think going forward, maybe some respect for mirror matches is in order when you're thinking about what tech Pokemon to actually use. And maybe even an uptick in Arc improves Miraidon as well in terms of its standing, because definitely prefer seeing more multi-prize decks in the format. So let me hear your thoughts down below. A lot of decks to discuss today. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow for another one. Cheers.